Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I am the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me as he does most training Fridays, Tom Walls from the Firearms Academy of Seattle. Tom, thanks for coming along tonight, man, and also thanks for agreeing to go a couple hours late today.
Well, you know what they say, Semper Gumby. Paul, it's good to see you again.
All right, let's go ahead and get started today. And as we do, I want to remind everybody if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube on the Polite Society podcast channels, go ahead and comment on those videos. We'll get your comments on the air as we go live here. And if you're watching us anywhere else, try and comment. I usually get those comments. Earlier this week, I did get some comments. I had to go search down and block somebody, which kind of made things look odd and slow on the air. But trust me, if you make inappropriate comments, you won't be making them for a long time. You'll get a few through. So, but you will eventually get the ban hammer. Why is my comment page not loading?
I hope that's rhetorical. You know I'm a Luddite.
Well, this is weird. All right, let's go ahead and go, Tom. I will get comments. We're getting comments on YouTube already. I just can't get them to load up. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll keep working on this on my end. And when we get them fixed, they're fixed, and we'll give it a try. So go ahead and let's talk about sights to start with, man.
Well, we came up with this. We're talking. Let me back up and preface this. It's a huge subject, so we are going to again tend to limit it to pistols because that's what most of our viewers are using, or as all of us use different platforms, that's a common thing. The concept is fairly universal, but especially adaptable and relevant to handguns because there's so many variants available. So what I like to do is I like to think back of the history, what drove the need for it, what technology drove the design, and some of the other stuff. So Paul's been kind enough to upload some pictures I took off the internet. Some of them have attributions, some of them don't. They're not mine. They're freely available, so I figured it was probably fair game to use them. And if anybody's offended if it's your picture, I'm sorry. Send something to Paul and yell at him because I just worked it.
Yeah, and if somebody claims them, I'll give them twice the profit we get from this episode.
Now let me ask you, we've got gunfire going on behind me. Is that coming through my microphone at all?
I can hear it a little bit, but it's a live show, and we're talking about firearms.
Yes, we are. That's from the Browncoat Manor Range.
So,
the bumpy things. In pistol self-defense stuff, we talk about the modern technique coming from Colonel Jeff Cooper, the things they used to have down in California, the leather stop competitions at Big Bear, where people were imitating the fast draw cowboy stuff. Now, for those of you that still have their hair and it's not white or gray, you may remember here's a word I don't use much, plethora of cowboy TV shows on TV. I mean, I grew up on Maverick and Lone Ranger and Gunsmoke and all that cool stuff. But every time they had the shootout on the street, it was, two guys facing each other, steely eyes, high noon, and fast gunfire from the hip and a crouching motion. And that's what was also being taught to the U.S. military. If you look at the old training videos, even into World War II and a little beyond, the FBI was doing the FBI crouch. Nobody was using the sights. So getting back to Colonel Cooper, he noticed that people were shooting fast. They were clearing the holster just lightning quick, but they couldn't hit jack squat. And some guy named Jack Weaver came up with the Weaver stance, where he took the time to come up and actually use the bumpy things And for those of you that don't know what this is gun guy shorthand for rear sight, front sight, and trigger. He was using the bumpy things, and maybe he was a fraction of a second slower, but he was getting hit. People started using the sights more. So up until that time, pistol sights on pistols were really rather minuscule. So let's go back a couple of centuries. Imagine an old black powder field cannon from pick a year, 1500, 1700. There's a big tube, and they just kind of pointed the tube and fired off the black powder in the ball or the shot or whatever went out. And we did the same thing with handguns. We did the same thing with muskets. There wasn't a great deal of aiming because generally it was not individual precise sniper fire. It was a battery of muskets or pistols, so you didn't need much. So again, with this rather antique thing, you see there are no real sights on it, front nor back. And this is a smooth bore missing pieces. But the fact that there are not now and never were sights on it is kind of interesting. Once rifling was developed to put a spin on the projectile, the bullet, to stabilize it, it became more accurate. Sights were kind of handy. So when you're looking down a tube, you can see what you're going to be pointing at, but it doesn't work very well because you can't do that because there's a breech and a bullet in the way. So we have to look over top of the tube, and we put some bumpy things, one in the back, one in the front, and line those up. That meant the tube was lined up, and the cartridge would be able to fire, and you would have the bullet hopefully go where you wanted the bullet to go. There's a problem with that, and if you could pop that first slide up, please. Oh, cool. It's like AV in high school. So this is with rifles, but it shows it pretty well. If you look at the top picture, you see the red line going from left to right, and that's your sight height. In this case, it's an optical sight, but the principal holds. It's in a straight line. Your eye sees in straight lines, and if you line up that, so the crosshairs are perfectly pointed at the bullseye that you want to hit, and make that line of sight parallel perfectly to the bore, the distance from the center of the sight down to the center of the bore, called the offset, makes the bullet hit lower. Now on this one, we're negating the effects of drag and gravity and bullet drop. You look down a little lower, and you'll notice that the rifle is pointed up slightly. The eye line from the optic to the target is still a straight line because we see in straight lines. But since there's an offset, you have to tilt the firearm, rifle, shotgun, pistol, upward till it intersects your line of sight, the red line, and at that point, that's what you call your point blank or your zero. And with a rifle, of course, you get two because the bullet drops, you go out farther. So we can dump that slide for a sec and go to the next one.
Sure.
You're doing this really well. It's like you're a pro or something. You see, it's a bit different with pistols. We've got a shorter distance because pistols aren't the only rifle distances. And that shows it pretty well. The top one has it the opposite of the other. You've got to have the muzzle up a little bit to get that line of sight. So if you've got again, you have the sights perfectly parallel to the bore, you're going to have that offset, you're going to shoot low. You have it tilted up. You set your point of impact, the hole, where it intersects your line of sight. And you can do that for different distances. Typically, with the handguns we see the most of, especially the 9mm ones, they're pretty fast bullet, pretty flat. Nominal muzzle velocity is about 1,100 to 1,150 feet per second for a non-plus P cartridge. They're good. I've comfortably shot them out to 200 with a little bit of luck and a big piece of steel. But most factory guns come zeroed, point of aim, point of impact meet, right about 15 or 20 yards. Most commonly, that's what you see. So go ahead and you can dump that slide in. Let's see your cheerful face.
Well,
that's kind of how.
I don't know if many people want to see my cheerful face. I mean,
well, mine's beautiful. I just got a whole bunch of wrinkles now. So that's the thing. You've got to have a set of sights that you can line up on top of the tube, and you have to account for that little bit of geometry. Actually, there's math involved. Having taken a basic gunsmithing course, just to understand the mechanics of firearms better. Not to be a pistol smith by any stretch of the imagination. I'm terrible with hand tools. But I did have to do the calculations to figure out what to do, how high to have the rear sight and how high to have the front sight to get that angle so things intersected where they would intersect.
Well, if we wanted to spend a 6 hour marathon show, we could talk about different ammunition and matching ammunitions to your sights, and
Good.
we could go into rifles and more specifically twist in barrel and how that affects where you're going to be impacting. We have 30 minutes. Unfortunately, we do not have a marathon show on schedule for tonight. But I would love to do that sometime.
This is why we're limiting it to handguns to try to get the lowest hanging fruit with the biggest application. So, with the advent of people actually using the bumpy things more, other than what the target shooters were doing, getting it more into a self-defense, call it combat shooting if you want, I don't care, to actually use the sights. Sights had to be easy to acquire, if you want to use the word, to get a sight picture, to align the sights, and to get a picture where you've got your target there and to put them in view quickly. So the next one, I think, shows a different, and these are iron sights. We're still, oh good, we did it right. If you look left to right, back in the day when my dad was shooting a little bit of competition in the late 50s, it's what they called a 6 o'clock hold. Now ignore the white dots for the moment. You have the rear sight, the front sight. You line up the tops of the sight with the tops of the sight, and people would say equal height. So there's the tops, equal light, or the light bars, the gap between the sides of the rear sight and the front sight. And you would put that top edge of the center of the front sight at a 6 o'clock position on your round bullseye. And that's called a 6 o'clock hold. So you could actually see your target. You get along to the combat sight picture. The sights are regulated. They're mathematically designed and machined precisely to parts of a thousandth of an inch. So you get the middle one. You get a combat hold. So wherever the center of your front sight is where your point of impact will be. Or you've got the one on the right hand, which is kind of between. So one of the first things you need to do is, out of the box, see where your sights are regulated, see where the design is, so you hold the sights in a consistent place. Now, back in the 80s, somebody came up with the idea of these white dots. And this is a good picture to illustrate this. It's easy to machine a white dot because you just drill into here. I'm doing this with my finger and I'm not even on camera. You drill into the sight with your round drill bit, and you have these dots and you can see them. The problem is, do you line up the center of the dots? Because they're not always the same size front to back, or they might not appear the same way. You line up the tops, you line up the bottoms, and it gets so confusing that it actually takes longer. The remedy that most instructors have comes in the form of a black Sharpie pen that will blot out those white dots. The way not to need them is to simply, on your draw stroke or your presentation from your ready position, bring it up in front of your dominant eye so you don't have to correct. I'll use a dummy gun here to illustrate this. So in your presentation, we teach at the Firearms Academy Seattle a high presentation with the support hand. And what I do is I take my thumb under my dominant eye, so when the gun comes up, the hands join, and the sights are already pretty much in line with my eye as I come out, rather than have it in the middle and have the gun come up this way and have to correct. If the sights come up, like Colonel Cooper said, the body aims the gun, the sights confirm the sights. So as we get more into combat self-defense shooting, we need a combination of sights that are accurate to a known distance, that are robust enough for combat, that we can quickly get a sight picture enough for an accurate shot. Make sense so far? You with me? Okay. Comes marketing. Now the different types. Let's go to the next picture. I think is the one I need to show.
before we do that, we've gotten some comments come in. Can we get to those
You
quick?
set it up good.
So let me hit this button. And Warsaw Patriot says, I learned this stuff when I trained with Airsoft as a kid. He says, with a CO2 gas blowback Airsoft pistol. Warsaw Patriot, you're a little bit younger than Tom and I are.
Most people are at this point.
Well, there is that, Tom. I'm only slightly younger than Dirt, but yeah, it's that there's Airsoft. My understanding, I learned about Airsoft honestly after I got into firearms.
Oh yeah, it was like the new thing.
And then it was the rage for quite a while among people who shot, and it had its fad. And there's there's a range here in Sioux Falls I haven't been to, but I just the next time I go airsoft shooting will be the second time. The first time was at the Firearms Academy of Seattle when I was doing when I was doing a force-on-force component to the active shooter interdiction course.
We do that, because it's a little safer, because there's no chance of getting a live cartridge in a gun that should be shooting Sims or Code Eagle we used at one time. Secondly, the laws in our state of Washington are written in such a way that a Sims gun can questionably be considered a firearm if you had a nasty prosecutor. So Airsoft just gets around that very nicely, and for pistol distances, they work wonderfully.
Yeah. The other thing with Airsoft is we're looking at, we have to be, excuse me, we have to be looking at a lot slower velocity and not exactly a fantastic round aerodynamically. You're looking at a little bit of a higher tech BB, but the velocities are walking speed.
The beauty of Airsoft is they can replicate the size and shape of most common models of guns. So they'll fit your holster. The magazines will fit your magazine pouch, and you can train and have that tactile sense to practice your draw stroke, your presentation. You're reacting to force on force without the risk of having a real firearm and introducing live ammunition in the scenario. Yeah. So they give a simulation. It's not like a gunfight, and I'm not saying I've been in one. Certainly not on my bucket list. But it gives you enough stress and as much realism as we can safely do. And it's a very useful training tool.
And again, I'll say this. I learned more on the force-on-force in that 1/2 day that we did force-on-force. I learned more in that 4 to 5 hour bucket of time than I had in all the training I'd done previously. And I'm going to say I probably learned more. I haven't learned as much since then. And that's been 4 or 5 years ago.
For someone who's at least an intermediate level shooter, so you've got the basic gun handling down competently, to introduce that level of realism in a good, well-designed scenario where you've got well-rehearsed role players. It's awesome. It's absolutely awesome.
And one more comment here, and then we'll get back to the slides here real quick. Charlie Delano says, my dad took me to a friend's cattle ranch. We shot cans and bottles with pistols. Targets were 100 feet, and it was good practice.
30 yards, yeah.
You
talk about the average engagement is within, 3 to 5 yards. If you can shoot well at 100 feet, my friend, you have that safety mortgage for the degradation and skill we get with stress. We have a drill we call the walkback drill. We start at steel, and it's a not quite 100-yard range. For that particular one, we have a bunch of them in the facility. And we'll start at 5 to 7 yards, and we'll go back 5 or 10 yards at a time, as the instructor says, and you drop out when you miss twice. Anyway, from steel silhouettes to 8-inch plates to make it challenging. And the last time we did this, my wife, Diane, actually beat me. She made it out the full distance. I think at that time we got it to 70 or 75 yards with iron sights with her 9mm 1911. Kicked my butt.
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing
First
to
time.
have.
She's my backup gun.
Um, let's go ahead and get back to the bumpy things and the wheelie gun.
Those
Should we go to the
bumpy
next
things,
one?
Yeah, go to the next one. I think we can run through this and still make time, which would be a record. Okay, so I really like this one. This is from NRA Women I got off the web. The top one shows the different types of sights. So if you go left to right, you can see the traditional ball in a bucket type thing for a Glock sight. Glock sights in the industry are known as real sight placeholders because they're plastic and they're fairly fragile, but they'll get you through. Most people will replace those. After that, we have a revolver with revolver sights, and then that looks like a SIG with a dot sights. Next to last on the right is a little itty-bitty snubby. Now, you'll notice there is no rear sight. There's a groove machined in there. And then the last one is an XS Express. You'll notice the rear sight's a shallow V with a horizontal line, and those are tritium. They glow in the dark, and a big, fat front sight. That last sight on the far right is designed for a very quick acquisition, actually from the old Safari, the African Safari rifles, where you had the nasty horned animal coming at you with tremendous speed and mass, and you needed to get a really fast sight picture. Each of those 5 guns have the correct set of sights for the correct use. Now you get down to the second row, again you've got some revolver sights. Those are adjustable, and you'll see that the light bars, the space of light between the left and right sides of the front sight to the rear sight are very narrow. Very good for target acquisition for a very fine sight picture. The next one with the 3 dots, oh my gosh, do you line up the tops, the bottoms, or whatever? You can't line up round things with round things. You'll line up lines with lines. A little faster, those light bars are a little more open. You see the gutter snipe sights there we talked about. It's kind of a groove, fast but closed in. And then the last one on the right is more the Glock sight, the ball in the bucket. Again, it's supposed to give you an outline. And the bottom picture there just shows somebody with a screwdriver adjusting some very classic Smith & Wesson revolver sights. Those before the newer sights were invented and being used in the 70s with custom 1911s were the thing to put on until manufacturers started coming out with other stuff.
I'm gonna, and I do not know why they haven't gone away from it, other than they invented it, and so it's theirs. Glock sights, my opinion, are the worst sights ever invented for anything. They are slow, and you have to be fairly advanced to get everything lined up and get the hits where you want them.
Ordinarily, this would be a great place to segue and branch off into red dot optics.
Yep.
We don't have time.
We do not. No, it's red dot optics, lasers. We could go a lot of places with this, but we've got a lot more to do here yet.
We're just kind of covering the choices here. Things to make the sights more visible in the dark are viable. Night sights, a tritium that glows in the dark. Now, not the kind you have to shine a light on for a couple of minutes. These glow all by themselves.
For several years they do.
Yes, I've actually had a couple sets where I've had them long enough. They're real quick, but if you have a good presentation, you'll get the sights lined up pretty well. Some people say you need a different color for the front ones than the 2 rear ones, the dots. Mm-hmm. Or I use one. Actually, there's another slide for that I think that covers it. I don't know if I've got one for some Heine straight 8s. If you don't find it, the Heine, the gentleman that invented them, is affiliated with Nighthawk now.
Okay.
It's the little glowing dot in the front sight, the traditional single dot, and at the bottom of the notch, there is right here. The bottom of the notch of the rear sight is also a single dot, so you just line up the top dot and the bottom dot, and it kind of makes a figure 8. So you may be off a little bit for elevation, but you're just dead bang on for windage.
Yeah.
Those are my personal preferred night sights because they're quick. And again, if you have that good presentation that we talked about, the sights come up pretty much in front of the eyes anyway, and that's just a refinement and a confirmation of sight.
All right.
Some people using the fiber optic. It's a little acrylic plastic rod that gathers in ambient light, and it doesn't take a big one, and those pop in the sunlight. Real popular with competitors. Downside is sometimes they fall out.
Seen it happen.
And then some people have combined the tritium and the fiber optic, so it's a huge market, and there's a lot of stuff out there.
Well, and not to beat a dead horse, but the reason it's a huge market is people are buying guns with bad sights on them. Hello, Glock. And realizing, look, either I'm horrible or these sights are awful, and the easiest thing to fix is the sights. You not so much.
People talk about, should I modify my gun? Does it look in court like I was a bad person? Changing the manufacturing. You can always justify sight change. I've got one gun that I tried a couple of different sets of sights on until it met my needs, and my needs are robust. So I don't use, on my carry guns, I don't use adjustable sights because I don't want the risk of Mr. Murphy messing with my rear sight. Screws coming loose, things getting knocked. I've had sights come loose in the dovetail in a new gun. That's an issue. With a certain 1911 manufacturer that shall remain nameless. But most combat guns, the way they're sold, self-defense guns, have fixed sights. In other words, they're not adjustable except what's called drift adjustable. You get a hammer and a plastic or brass punch, and you tap the rear sight in the appropriate direction. Which, by the way, when you move the rear sight, if you want the bullet impact from what you're sighting to move to the right, you move the rear sight to the right. There's lots of videos and stuff available on the web on how to do that.
My concern there, and we need to get moving back to these slides because we're running quickly on the time we've got, but my concern there is I am not the most graceful person in the world, and I bump into things more than occasionally. And if I bump wrong, rear sight will move. And therein lies my concern.
You go into any police squad room in the country I can think of, and you will see door jambs with the paint rubbed off right about pistol belt high. So, yeah. Let's get that next slide here. We might make time tonight.
All right. And one moment here. There we go.
Okay. So this is just a real quick history. This is the back of a replica cap and ball revolver circa 1830 to 1860. You notice the rear sight again is this little teeny thing. I just threw that in there. Well, one, it's a pretty picture. I wish I knew who took it. And secondly, that's the kind of vestigial thing people thought was appropriate. That's with the hammer cock back. And the next slide, I think, is the last one we really need to see. Oh, I guess not. That's a gutter snipe or groove sight and looks like a Smith & Wesson Airweight. Somebody has made a bright colored front sight on that. Let's try the next one. We should hit this eventually. There. Okay. So this is an interesting example. This is a real ball and bucket. You've got a glow-in-the-dark front sight. You've got a U-shaped rear sight. Again, if you like round things, lining up with round things, that's fine. My point for the whole thing in the last half hour is that once you define the mission of your equipment, something I've been harping on for years, know what you need your equipment to do and find the right equipment, you have a lot of things out there. The best way I know to look at different sets of sights is to go where people are that have guns that may have different sights. That's check out your classmates at a gun class with instructors' permission ahead of time, look at each other's guns, and if you get permission to do that safely, put it up to eye. See how it works for you. See how easy it is to pick up. Gun shows, just look at used guns, see what's out there. There's some real whiz-bang stuff I've seen advertised that is absolute crap. And there's some very simple designs that are wonderful if you work on your presentation so the sights, just by how you move the gun naturally and by practice, up in front of the dominant eye, you get your sight alignment and sight picture. The variety of just iron sights that we've talked about is wide, and there's some really good stuff out there.
All right, let me get a couple comments in. We got to get out of here. This from Carrie Ann Auclair. She is one of the people that helps me with Polite Society podcast. She says, no matter night or day, you still could have to defend yourself, and you're you of the operations. She also says, let me get that. I think she tried clarifying, and therefore you need options. So,
oh yes, voice to text, wonderful thing, isn't it? Yeah, and the things we didn't talk about. You mentioned lasers. I'm a huge fan of lasers, not just as cat toys. Lasers are wonderful for when you can't get the sights up to the eye or in the dark. The red dot, all the optics are really coming on right now. We're seeing many, many more of those in our beginning classes because they're being sold as a package with new handgun. Lots of stuff out there. We could talk some other time if viewers wanted with eyeglasses issues, with focal issues. All kinds of stuff is available just talking about sights.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to touch on this, and that is that going with red dots and lasers, it's not inexpensive, and Tom offered a way you can get a little bit of a discount by you try somebody's, and that's how I came on my fascination for lasers. Mm-hmm. I met Miggy Gonzalez down in Tennessee, and I found that after my medical issues, I was just as fast with Miggy's gun and just as accurate with Miggy's gun as I was before when I was using iron sights. And that's
he also makes a wicked Hawaiian pizza with pineapple.
Yes. And not gun related, but if it's not got pineapple on it, it's not proper pizza. Just
there you go.
Right there.
I can email it any day now.
Warsaw Patron.
Somebody else here. Yeah.
Eye floaters and vision changes for one. You know, there's another hour we could spend right there, bud.
Oh, easy. Astigmatism, nearsightedness, glasses with multifocal points, the lineless bifocal, a whole nother thing right there. And you know, people my age, it's not if you're going to get bifocals, it's when. Ways around that to extend your shooting career another decade. I have recently made the switch over to a red dot sight. Actually, I use green on one of my guns. It just pops for me, and I kept crap for it, but I'm shooting as well as I was 5 or 10 years ago, maybe even a little better.
Very cool. Well, we are down. We are actually overtime. Big shock. Tom, what's coming up at the Firearms Academy of Seattle? Have you got any beginner classes where people could actually, dial in their sights?
I have. After I finish this podcast, I've got to review my notes because I'm teaching our Introduction to Handguns class tomorrow, in which we at FAS also have the option at the end of trying some of the guns from the school safe. We don't sell guns, but we have about a dozen representative of type that people can actually get their hands on and give a little test drive and get an idea what they do and don't like about handguns. We've got our introductory course. Another one that we're teaching Sunday, Diane and I, is an introduction to concealed carry, our concealed carry 101 class. But the cool thing at FAS, just in the last, I think it's 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, our 2024 class schedule has come out. So if you're in the Northwest or want to come up here and train on our 40-acre facility, we got over a dozen ranges, some great instructors, guest instructors, our own staff. I'm just bragging. We have classes we have introduced coming for 2024 for carbine, more practical stuff because our clientele is just good people that want to use guns responsibly. Please check out the website, firearmsacademy.com.
All right. On my end, I want to invite everybody to please come back 7 p.m. Central Time, the only time zone that matters, tomorrow night when we're going to have the Weekend Bullet. That's our weekend review show. And let me see who's going to be with me on that show. You got to load the calendar, and Google takes just a half a second to come up. Coop Cooper and Dan Waz and one other person that I have not booked yet will be joining me tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. Central, 8 Eastern, 6 Mountain, and 5 Pacific. Hawaii, you're on your own. So come join us. Thanks, everybody, for watching today, and we will see you